George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
The answer to the question after Nasrallah, what next, has been already delivered. The big question now is, after Iran's spectacular over Tel Aviv and other Air Force bases elsewhere, what comes next? Will Israel attack Iran? And if so, Iran is going to respond tenfold, 100-fold, 1,000-fold, depending on which Iranian spokesman you listen to. For the Palestinians in Gaza, it is business as usual. Carnage in the orphanage, as scores of little children are slaughtered by Israel because they're so mad at having failed to stop the Iranian fireworks display. And in the Lebanon, it's very heavy work indeed. The Israelis have sent raiding parties of commandos across the border, but they're not doing well, and many of them are already going home in boxes. And the Ukrainian front continues to tumble actually, and the Russian forces could be in Kiev by the end of the year. You think I'm exaggerating? Wait till you hear Colonel Douglas Macgregor. And is it the last waltz for Kamala Harris's doomed presidential campaign? Looks that way to me. I'm predicting that Jill Stein will beat Kamala Harris in the state of Michigan. Mark that up on your board. It's the mother of all talk shows, and we're here for the next 2 hours. Stay tuned.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
Well, the jury's no longer out. It is official. Iran can hit any part of Israel at any time of the day. That means they can hit the Knesset, they can hit Netanyahu's house, they can hit the nuclear weapons base at Dimona, they can hit any Israeli airbase, any concentration of Israeli forces. There is no longer any question about that. Iran's missile technology is simply world class, and certainly more than a match for the misnamed Iron Dome. There wasn't much iron on display in Israel's defensive capability last night, as 180 ballistic missiles, including one at least of the new Fatah missile, which leaves Tehran and 12 minutes later arrives in the center of Tel Aviv. It was a spectacular display. The truth is, it was performative rather than functional. The truth is that if Iran had wanted, they could have killed thousands of people in Israel last night, but they did not want to. Their targets were military bases. Their targets were strategic. There is no question that Israel is no match for Iran. That, on the face of it, introduces a new equilibrium in Middle East politics, the likes of which has never been seen before. The United States tried to bring down Iran's weapons, but they singularly failed to do so. They fired 12 of their very best anti-missile missiles, and they all failed. So we now have a situation so dangerous that it is almost incalculable. Because if Netanyahu attacks Iran, as most of you in our poll this evening think that he intends to do, then Iran is going to respond somewhere between 10 and 1,000 times stronger than they did last night, depending on which Iranian spokesman you are listening to. But even at the lower order, 10 times last night, in a way which is intended to damage the civilian infrastructure, in a way which is determined to make a strategic difference to the state of Israeli defenses, troop concentrations, for example, there'll be a very large number of casualties. And then, if Israel responds again, it's almost certain that we'll be in all-out war in the Middle East. It's a moot point whether we're in all-out war right now. After all, the Palestinians are being slaughtered in huge numbers. The Lebanese civilians are being slaughtered in huge numbers. And just like in Gaza, in Lebanon, 70% of the casualties so far have been women and children. But Hezbollah is turning out to be more than a match for the Israeli invaders too. One who thought that the cold-blooded murder of Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, would lead to a collapse in morale or a collapse in fighting force on the part of the movement that he built over 32 years and designed and created effectively. Anyone who thought that there would be a collapse of morale, collapse in ability of their fighting forces now knows differently. Somewhere between 8 and 80 Israeli soldiers have been killed today in the first field, the first forest of the south of Lebanon. And almost all of them are young men. They're not quite the 18 of the famous Vietnam-era song, but they're no more than 22 or 23, and that includes the officers. A captain, a 23-year-old captain, was one of the first to fall. So the flower of Israeli manhood is now lying dead in the first field, in the first forest of the south of Lebanon. And the ability of the Israeli armed forces to properly penetrate the south of and conquer it and make any, can already say on day one, is virtually. The truth is, Israel can only bomb people. Israel can only kill women and children. When it comes to man-to-man fighting on the territory of the country that they are invading, they are a complete fail. And I predicted this before it happened, and I don't think you need my predictions anymore. You won't see it on the mainstream television, but you will see it on social media. It is now undeniable that the Iranian attack last night was a stupendous success and has changed everything utterly, just as it is undeniable that the Israeli invasion of the Lebanon so far is a complete failure. What I'm more interested in is the performance of the Western governments. Now, the United States and the United Kingdom say they do not support an Israeli attack on Iran. Of course, they could be lying. It's quite likely that they are lying. But they could also be telling the truth, because they know that events may very well become uncontrollable thereafter. They do not want, I am sure, to be sucked into World War III over Israel and its determination to occupy a small piece of its neighbor south of the Litani River. That's not a casus belli that is worth it for them. So they may well be trying to stop Israel from responding, but the political forces on which Netanyahu depends will not accept anything less. So, what do these Western governments do? Well, Keir Starmer, claiming to speak for Britain, made a prime ministerial announcement last night saying we stand and will always stand for Israel, despite the fact that a rather large majority of public opinion in Great Britain doesn't like Israel very much at all. There's only 16% of the British people who define themselves as supporters of Israel. And for a Prime Minister already out on a limb on everything from his wife's lingerie to his designer glasses, donated by a homosexual Bangladeshi billionaire, but not declared by either of them, and there are multiple inquiries now going on inside the British Parliament on what you might call Pantygate, or what I first coined as Pantygate, are enough of a problem for Keir Starmer, but he is a glutton for punishment. Or perhaps he's compromised in some way. But he's dug down. He has doubled down on his support for Israel. And he says, not me, that the British Royal Air Force was involved last night trying to defend Israel, in which case they didn't do a very good job, but in which case they have now made themselves belligerents in this conflict in Lebanon, in this conflict in Gaza, and now the conflict to come with Iran. That's a very dangerous place to be. Britain has many assets and many interests in the Persian Gulf. There are countries in the Persian Gulf that are effectively British and American military bases. They are now in very severe danger if the balloon fully goes up. The Royal Air Force Base in Cyprus, in Akrotiri, is now a legitimate target for Iran. If Iran's action was legal, and I have not yet seen anyone dispute that it was legal, an act of self-defense for multiple egregious offenses committed against them by Israel, if it was a legal action and Britain took the side of the illegal belligerent in the exchange, then Britain has made itself a legitimate target for retaliation by Iran. That's a very uncomfortable place for British people to find themselves in, especially when they don't much care for the third party, Israel, for whom it's all being done. But what does it do to the American presidential election? Is it the last waltz? I merely mention waltz because I saw J.D. Vance, metaphorically speaking, put to bed Tim Walz, a hapless fool of a man, in the vice presidential debate last night. I think that the current state of affairs makes a Kamala Harris presidential victory simply impossible. I see no path to victory for the Democrats in the midst of all this. It was bad enough during the Gaza genocide, but now we've got a Lebanese genocide and a war with Iran on the horizon. How does a party which depends on the votes of the minority ethnic communities, depends on the votes of students, depends on the votes of activists, depends on the votes of Muslims, of Arab Americans, in order to win a presidential election? How can it now happen? I personally know 80,000 Lebanese Americans in the town of Dearborn alone. Do you think any of them are going to be voting for Kamala Harris? That's why I predicted earlier, it's a long shot, I'd put money on Jill Stein defeating Kamala Harris in the state of Michigan. But it isn't just Michigan. It's Michigan, it's Wisconsin, it's Pennsylvania. And no Democrat can win the presidency if they lose any, never mind all, of those three states. So it's President Donald Trump that's coming up, which some of you may be celebrating on the principle that even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and Donald Trump might be at least a stopped clock. For me, The reason I would prefer Trump rather than Harris is that Trump will end the Ukraine war in very short order. And thus one potential theatre of World War III will be closed down. But Donald Trump is just as likely to create World War III in the Persian Gulf. He's just as likely to do anything and everything for this 7 million people, a colonial settlement on the Mediterranean, many thousands of miles away. And nobody, except in the darkest terms, can properly analyze exactly why. Whatever happened to America first? Whatever happened to making America great again? Why has the United States, and the United Kingdom for that matter, so shackled themselves to a leader like Netanyahu, who's hated by at least half of the people in Israel, never mind the people of the world? Why have they done this? But done this, they have. And there's every possibility, therefore, that whilst we might not get World War III in Eastern Europe, we'll get it in the Eastern Mediterranean instead. We'll get it in the Persian Gulf instead. Well, look, there are multiple issues that are on the agenda tonight, and 3 brilliant guests, and my voice is going. So let me cut short my monologue for now and tell you that the irreplaceable, ubiquitous Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, Chair of American Studies Department at the University of Tehran, is up right after this. Stay tuned. Let me say that you can listen to the audio-only version of MOATS on our MOATS podcast, and the numbers on that are going through the roof. Just search MOATS with George Galloway on Apple, Spotify, Google, or whichever platform you listen to your podcasts on. In recent weeks, it's been the #1 political podcast in Benin, Jordan, the Gambia, Qatar, Jamaica, Ghana, Iceland, Malaysia, Singapore, Sweden, and the Philippines. #1 political podcast in all those countries. Truly, truly phenomenal. Do you know that BBC News has lost 40% of its audience in the last 2 years? It's official. And of course, that is the sensible thing to do. But to get people to tune in and change course and listen to a radically different point of view is even more difficult. But it's happening. And the numbers that we are racking up are now in their millions.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, 20,000 people have voted on the poll this evening. Will Israel attack Iran, yes or no? And the vast majority, I'm sorry to say, consider the answer likely to be yes. But you can vote on my Telegram, t.me/George Galloway, on my X account, on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. If you are watching on the YouTube stream, please share with all of your friends and contacts. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is almost at 500,000 subscribers. And that'll make a difference to me algorithmically if I can get to that number. So if you haven't yet subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so now. If you want to call the show, you'll be doing me a favor, because my voice is not likely to last otherwise. If it was any other night, I would have taken the night off. So poorly do I feel. But on a night like this, I really didn't feel that I could afford to. The phone number is toll-free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. Free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 08081 965522. And the worldwide number, 0044 203-966-2625. Well, I think that a star was born over the last few years as Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi came more and more often on the so-called mainstream television. But people like us were the first to recognize his brilliance. But his performance on mainstream news has literally had people standing up in their living rooms and cheering him on. He's been very loyal to us. He never says, no, I can't come on the mother of all talk shows because I'm going on CNN. Oh, far from it. Please welcome back Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi to the mother of all talk shows. Professor, congratulations on your media round. They are beyond compare, as I always knew and predicted they would be. But what about the Iranian response to the multiple egregious criminal offenses that Israel has committed against your country? Just in recent times, never mind longer ago than that. I called it earlier performative. I'm guessing you won't like that, but by performative I mean this, that a deliberate attempt was made, and it was successful, not to kill anybody. A deliberate attempt was made not to destroy any Israeli civilian infrastructure, that the targets were entirely state and military targets. In that sense, it was performative, but a very impressive performance. That's my analysis. What's yours?
Well, first, I'd like to thank you for your very kind words. And you're the master, and I learned from you, and I continue to learn from you. And I hope to be of some use to the audience and to work alongside you and a growing number of people who are active against war and genocide. Thankfully, things have changed a lot since a year or two ago. I think that we have to look at it in the broader context. In April, when the Iranian embassy was struck and the Iranians wanted to carry out a response, I'm sure you recall that Iran used a large number of drones and a few missiles. Most of the drones were all very old, dirt cheap, as they say, and the missiles were mostly old missiles. The Americans, they did the heavy lifting, and the Israelis brought most of them down to great cost. I think the Americans spent $2.5 billion and the Israelis almost $1.5 billion. But the real objective, and some of the more advanced missiles got through and hit their targets, but the real objective of Iran, the number one objective, was to gather intelligence about the defense capabilities that the Americans and the Israelis and the French and the British and everyone else had mustered together. And this time around, the Iranians were much more serious. And you're absolutely correct. The Iranians did not strike civilian targets. The Iranians struck key military targets. From what I'm hearing from Tehran, there was enormous damage to the infrastructure of the targets that were struck. And the Iranians said immediately that if the Israelis choose to respond, which I think will probably happen and will probably happen soon, that the Iranians will strike again, and it will strike again much harder. And I think probably the Americans and the Israelis miscalculated. They didn't think that Iran would hit so hard, or that the Iranians had such advanced weapons and in such large numbers. And I think if the Israelis do continue this, they will be outgunned. The Iranian strikes will be massive, and they can go on for weeks and months because Iran has many underground missile tunnels and missile bases across the country, which can't be hit. And the reason is that Iran prepared them for potential war with the United States. After the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, the Iranians began to develop these capabilities. So Israel is not the United States. It's completely dependent on the United States and the West to sustain itself. So I think that any escalation, any further escalation by the Israelis actually hurts the Israeli regime more than anyone else and empowers the collective resistance and the axis of resistance. But I'm sure that the Israelis are hoping otherwise. But usually what I've noticed, at least, is that Western powers and the Israelis, since they look down upon the rest of the world, their calculations are usually made in arrogance. And that arrogance and hubris is what brings about their defeat. And I think we saw that in Gaza. We saw that alongside the border with Lebanon. They murdered Seyed Hassan Nasrallah. I was there. I was literally a 1,000 meters away when they struck Seyed Hassan Nasrallah but slaughtered hundreds of people. I was there actually today as well. I went to see the neighborhood. They're still digging people out from under the rubble in that particular attack. They thought that this was a big win, but it wasn't. I think it raised the stature of Hezbollah and made Seyed Hassan Nasrallah a bigger hero than it was perceived before. He's much more popular across the region and the world. Hezbollah is now, everyone is looking to Hezbollah. Its popularity is going to have an impact. And the soldiers and the commandos and the officers, they're extremely highly motivated. And I'm sure you've seen the news today. The Israelis tried to enter Lebanon and they were badly mauled by Hezbollah forces and not by the Rizwan brigade. They have not been a part of the fighting yet. So I think the Israeli regime always overestimates its capabilities, underestimates its foes, and that is one reason why it's losing.
We'll come back to the Iran front in a minute. Let's go to the Lebanese front, which you have in any case segued into there. It was a very bad day for the Israeli invasion force. I say invasion force, but they're scarcely over the border and are already sustaining very serious damage. Because, of course, for Israelis who don't want to be there, whose mind is half on the beach, these are not people who are particularly keen to die for Benjamin Netanyahu. Many of them may even be political opponents of his. Their morale must have taken a hell of a beating today, on day one, in the first field, in the first forest. What do you say?
I agree completely. And I think it was both a combination of arrogance, but also the fact that many of these Israelis are not prepared to fight. They've, first of all, been fighting for almost a year now in Gaza. They're tired. They've had many casualties. The reservists, many of them are not performing well at all, according to the reports. Some are not even reporting to duty. But also, you're absolutely correct. The Israelis have been pampered by the collective West. The West has been pampering this regime all the time. Otherwise, without the West, it would not last more than a few days on the battlefield. And so these men and women, their lives have been very easy over there. They were only used to, when they were wearing uniform, they were used to humiliating Palestinians in the West Bank or guarding the apartheid wall in Gaza or the West Bank and shooting at people who approached the apartheid wall and shooting them in the head or in the knee and having target practice. This was the very difficult work that they had back then. Or they'd go into the West Bank, they'd go into houses, beat people up, take over their houses, take photos of themselves humiliating Palestinians. That was the usual job that they had, not fighting a serious military force like Hezbollah, which is highly trained and which has prepared itself for this war for the last 18 years. They've been developing thousands of kilometers of tunnels throughout the south and central part of Lebanon, and probably the north as well. And the Israelis, they thought that they scored decisive wins by assassinating a few people, but you know this better than I. Beirut has always been the weakest link. It is a center for espionage. This was the case during the PLO here, and Western embassies, Western journalists, Western NGOs, especially over the last couple of decades, this has become a thing. All of these are means to gather intelligence. All these impoverished refugees, but also people like the right-wing militias. You recall Jajja's Lebanese forces who were allied to the Israelis. And during the 1982 invasion of Lebanon, they, alongside the Israelis, went into the Sabra Shatila camp, which is not very far from where we are. And in less than 48 hours, they killed almost 4,000 people, Palestinians, ordinary Palestinians, and some Lebanese. So these massacres that we're seeing today, carried out by the Israeli regime and their allies, they're not new. And it doesn't have anything to do with Hezbollah. It goes back way before Hezbollah. But the point is that Lebanon is not Beirut. Beirut, the Israeli regime scored some successes, which I think in the long run are detrimental to Israeli interests, because Hezbollah has become more popular and Seyed Hassan Nasrallah has become extremely popular outside of those beyond the people who always loved him. And you could see that on the streets over when it was announced that he was martyred. But Hezbollah's capabilities across the country, its military capabilities, are untouched. The underground capabilities are completely untouched. And the Israelis have, as you pointed out, they have not yet set foot into this country, and they're already suffering major casualties. Imagine what it will be like when they try to get in to the country and advance 20 kilometers inside or 30 kilometers inside. It'll be a bloodbath.
And it's carnage as usual for the poor prisoners in the Gaza concentration camp. So angry were the Israeli regime at Iran's response, they slaughtered children in an orphanage. Now, actually, we've become inured to hospitals being destroyed, schools being destroyed. It's a new low for Netanyahu to murder children in an orphanage. Is the possibility of the wider war likely to make things even worse for the people in Gaza, or might Israel's attention have to be diverted elsewhere?
Well, I'd just like to add that after Iran's retaliation to Israeli provocations, and I just want to remind the audience, and I'm sure they know because your audience is very politically aware, the Iranian response was because of the murder of Ismail Haniyeh, the martyrdom of Miss Ismail Haniyeh, who was a guest of the president of Iran and his companion, and also the murder of the Iranian general, and of course Seyed Hassan Nasrallah, and a host of other reasons and provocations that the Israelis carried out against Iran. There are a host of reasons why the Iranians retaliated. But instead of, and the Iranians, as we were discussing earlier, struck military targets. As revenge, last night here in Beirut, the Israelis pounded southern Beirut till morning. And today we went to Dahieh, downtown Beirut, which you know, and you've had TV shows there. They brought down many buildings, apartment blocks, And we went today and saw some of these blocks that were struck this morning. There was smoke rising, and they were constantly telling us to move, to leave, so that because they were afraid of more airstrikes. But when I was walking through, in one area, there were 5 apartment blocks, we were told, because there was just rubble. They said there were 5 apartment blocks here. And I was just thinking, maybe people right now are still alive underneath. And it, just thinking about it made me feel sick. So out of revenge, they went and slaughtered orphans in Gaza and started destroying southern Beirut. Yet Western journalists, for the most part, mainstream journalists, legacy media journalists, are only talking, they erase this from history. Even when they murdered Seyed Hassan Nasrallah, when he was martyred, they focus on saying Hezbollah stronghold, Hezbollah site, whereas they slaughtered hundreds of people in order to kill him. And they said that, well, they're embedded in the population and they're hiding among the population. And then last night we saw CNN in Tel Aviv say the Mossad building is in a densely populated area and people are at risk. Why doesn't CNN, why doesn't Western media call that an example of the Israeli regime hiding among its own civilian population? In fact, Hezbollah created those tunnels under Beirut so that the Israelis would not bother to strike civilians because it was so deep. But they used 83 one-ton missiles, the Israeli regime. It was amazing. As I said, I was close by in order to kill him. And today, when we went there, they were, as I said, they're still digging people out. So this is a barbaric regime. But when you speak to when I've been speaking to most journalists, most mainstream Western journalists, even some of them in Beirut, it doesn't seem to matter to them. It's about Israel it's all about Israel defending itself. Everything is about Israel defending itself. It's stunning.
Yes, banal but stunning. We're used to it by now. I can see it still surprises you. Finally, Professor, let us return to the Iran front. You believe, I believe, and almost 3/4 of our audience already believes in our poll that Netanyahu is going to attack Iran. Of course, there's a spectrum of potential attacks. We've seen that before. But let's assume a significant Israeli attack on Iran. Will Iran respond immediately, or will we be back in the same territory we've been in over the last couple of months, in your opinion? I know you don't make these decisions, you don't speak for the government in Iran, but as an acute observer, is it likely that Iran would respond immediately to such an egregious assault?
Well, George, over the past few weeks, I've been saying that Iran is going to retaliate. And as things went forward, more and more people started attacking me and saying that I'm talking nonsense and that the Iranians won't retaliate. But ultimately, they did last night, and it was a heavy strike. I have no doubt that if the Israelis target Iran in the coming hours or in the coming days, the Iranians will retaliate very harshly, and it will be a more heavy strike, a significantly heavier strike than what we saw yesterday. And I believe that the Iranians are prepared to continue this indefinitely. And the Israelis can't do this indefinitely. It's a small regime. It's fully dependent on the West, but it's also fighting in the West Bank, subjugating Palestinians. It's fighting on the Lebanese border, and it's being badly beaten, as we've seen today. It's failed after a year in Gaza. In the Red Sea, the Americans have failed to do anything. The Iraqis are outraged and want revenge. The resistance in Iraq and Syria will continue to work against the regime, any escalation is going to hurt the Israelis more. And the only thing that I think is possible to, at least in the eyes of Netanyahu, to save him, because I think that Netanyahu knows he will lose against Hezbollah, and I think he knows he'll lose against Iran. I think he's just he's desperate and wants to get the Americans into the war. And of course, that shows he doesn't even care about the Americans. Just like when he used supply chains for electronic goods, he discredited Western companies and companies linked to countries affiliated with the West. I'm never going to buy any Western products anymore, electrical appliances or laptops or anything like that, because I don't trust them anymore. So he doesn't care about brand America or brand Europe or brand Korea or Japan or Taiwan. He cares about himself. He doesn't even care about Israel, in my opinion. But if the Americans fall into his trap and get involved in the war, the Americans will be confronting a very different situation from the past. The resistance in Iraq will sweep America away. They will be expelled from Iraq. There'll be nothing left. And the Persian Gulf region, all American bases will be destroyed if there's fighting between Iran and the United States. And those regimes that host Americans, their oil and gas installations will be destroyed because they'll be hostile. And some of your viewers may say, well, Iran doesn't have that capability. The Americans have lost the war in the Red Sea to Ansarullah, which has just come out of a 7-year-long genocidal war where everything in the country was destroyed. And the Americans have been unable to open the Red Sea. Does anyone really think that the Americans are going to be able to open up the Persian Gulf to oil and gas exports when Iran has all these underground bases, drone and missile bases that can take out all these oil and gas installations that are right alongside the Iranian border, and all those tankers that are easy targets for Iran? That would mean oil and gas the price would go through the roof, and it would bring down the global economy, and millions of people would be on the move. So I think it's very important for Americans and Europeans to recognize that this type of war would change the world. It could potentially destroy the world economy, and the lives of everyone would be severely impacted as a result. So they should think twice before sacrificing themselves for a war criminal and corrupt individual like Netanyahu.
Professor Seyed Mohammad Marandi, as always, a tour of the horizon, a tour de force. Thanks for joining us. Rentier says Professor Marandi had a brilliant performance on Sky News. The interviewer was floored. And Babyface Maz110 says Professor Seyed Marandi killed it with the Sky News interview. Actually, he's bowling them all over wherever he gets the chance to appear. Let's take a quick break. Then it's your calls right up to the hour. Stay tuned. Even though it has moved its mass murder campaign from Gaza, although there's still mass murdering in Gaza, of course, no day off for the poor refugees in the concentration camp of Gaza, but they have moved their killing fields to Lebanon. Lebanon, a sovereign country. Lebanon, a member of the United Nations. Lebanon, a country to which every other country in the world has diplomatic relations, has ambassadors in place, is being remorselessly bombed with hundreds and hundreds of air attacks, killing hundreds and hundreds of people every day, most of them women and children. Was it ever thus? As I said the other night, put the letter H in front of any Arab child and you can slaughter them with impunity. Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, they all look the same. They all are deserving of death, violent, sudden death, delivered from American airplanes, using American missiles and bombs, with British airplanes supplying the targeting information and the offending American and British reconnaissance flights flying out of somebody else's country, namely Cyprus, and the British sovereign base there.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Big but banal news breaking right now. Angela Rayner, the British Deputy Prime Minister's Ibiza party night, was also a freebie. She has just declared it on her members' interests, months after it happened, of course. But the amount of donation is £836. A visit to DJ Booth High, Ibiza. That's the Labour government, ladies and gentlemen. Let's take a call. David in Swindon. Go ahead, David.
Hello, George. Yeah, sorry to hear your voice is going a bit, but that gives me a great opportunity to ramble on a little
difficult.
bit.
I'll be all right by Sunday. I tried to get my wife to stand in for me, but she declined. She'll be with us later.
Okay, anyway, that gives me a chance to have a little ramble. I'll do my own little monologue for a couple of minutes, then I'll come to my main question.
Okay, go on. Yeah, you'll be helping me.
Professor Marandi, I've got a list of 3 people here. Professor Marandi versus Piers Morgan absolutely demolished him. All Piers Morgan could say is, what about the 7th of October? Israel's reciting and then they bring in the thing about Marandi absolutely demolished him. What about the illegal settlements? What about this? There's another, Loki was on Piers Morgan. I've just watched that. I don't know if you had a chance to see Loki versus Piers Morgan very recently. He demolished him as well.
No contest. It was no contest.
Okay, now the other person, I never heard of this guy before, John Mearsheimer, was on Piers Morgan.
A big man, a big American professor, yeah.
Well, okay, I'd never heard of him before. That shows my ignorance. So, as you say, it's a University of the Airways. I learned he was stunning. Piers was shaking on Ukraine. Yeah. And, Piers going... Piers said that Hamas was an existential threat to Israel. And the guy said, what do you mean existential threat? Existential means wipe out. Hamas have got, bows and arrows and homemade rockets. So, Piers was put in his place there. That's it. So, Professor Marandi and all those guys. But my main point tonight is...
Well, I'll tell you what, I want to make one... he's no longer a friend of mine, Piers Morgan, so I'm not saying this out of any affection. But one thing I will say, at least Piers Morgan is allowing guests like that to appear, which the BBC and ITV definitely would not do. Neither, because it's a pre-record, he wanted to pre-record me next Monday coming, but it can't be done. Because it's a pre-record, he could be suppressing these clips in which he is left bleeding on the floor by the 3 guests that you describe. So at least let's give Piers Morgan the credit. He's not afraid to bring these people onto his shows, and he's not, at least for the most part, going to edit them out. Last word to you, Dave.
Yeah, but back to my main point that I was going to phone up about was, why shouldn't Iran have a nuclear bomb? We all know Israel's got a nuclear bomb. They got their uranium.
Hundreds of them.
Yeah, but they got their uranium. Yeah, I know. Yeah, they got their uranium from Africa via France, because we all know France and Ukraine uranium. So what's the big? Why shouldn't Iran have a nuclear weapon? It's just unbelievable.
Well, that's my view. It's not theirs. Yeah, look, I'm against nuclear weapons. I was arrested at Faz Lane and carried off, gave an interview to the BBC upside down, being carried off by the by the police. I was thrown in prison for protesting outside Britain's nuclear weapons base. I'm against nuclear weapons. But there is no case for saying that some people have got the right to have nuclear weapons and point them at others who are not allowed to have nuclear weapons. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't ask Professor Marandi this. He might not have been able to answer if I had. If I was running Iran, I would long ago have had a nuclear weapon. After all, that was the whole case that was made to us in the Cold War, wasn't it? That you've got mutually assured destruction, that both sides can destroy each other with nuclear weapons so they won't go to war with each other. That was the case, that was the bill of goods that we were sold. So if that's the case between East and West in the Cold War, it must be the case between Iran and Israel. And Iran is actually facing several nuclear weapons powers, not just Israel, but the US, France, and the United Kingdom are all declared enemies of Iran, and they all have nuclear weapons and the capability of destroying all of Iran with nuclear weapons. So why shouldn't Iran have nuclear weapons? If I was in charge of the country, they'd already have them. But I'm going to go one step further. I've said this before, so don't clutch your pearls. I hope it doesn't frighten the horses. But I believe Iran already has nuclear weapons. That's my belief. I hope they never have to use them. David, thanks. Now, don't forget, if you've just joined the show, you can download the MOATS podcast from tomorrow, a podcast which is going from strength to strength. We're now in the top 20 in Hong Kong, UAE, South Africa, Portugal, and get this, we are number 1 in the Gambia. Who knew we were as popular as that in the Gambia? But perhaps the most significant thing is that we're on the cusp of the top 40 in the United Kingdom as well. And there's hundreds, thousands of podcasts in the UK. Next week, we'll be in the top 40. So you can scan the QR code in the corner of your screen right now. Let's go to Jalil in New Jersey on Palestine. Go ahead, Jalil.
Hello, George. Thank you for taking my call. It's Jalal, by the way, but it's fine. Jalil just as well. I was listening. I was watching the show live and watched Professor Marandi, which I love because he's very precise. He tells it like it is, and he doesn't hold any punches. What I like to add to it is, if Israel is allowed to go ahead and assassinate Nasrallah, Haniya, and whoever they are, which is against any international law as we know it, why is the Iranians, the Hezbollahs, not attacking the Netanyahu and the defense minister and all these genocidal maniacs? Why is it off the table, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think it is off the table. It might be back firmly in the center of the table if Netanyahu now attacks Iran. Iran will have to ramp up the quality of its targets. There's so many times you can bomb air bases. The Mossad headquarters has been destroyed. Can't destroy it a second time. Again, if I were running Iran, I would have already ramped up the quality of the targets. But give credit where it's due to Iran. They could have killed thousands of Israelis. They deliberately decided not to do so. They did it at night, and they attacked only military and intelligence targets. They could have attacked concentrations of forces, but did not, even though those forces are invading Lebanon, even though those forces are invading Gaza. They could have destroyed them, but they did not. And the reason they did not was to keep the body count at 0. Now you've got a demonstration of Iran's ability to pulverize all of Israel. That is a huge achievement and is best appreciated because there were 0 fatalities. So maybe they're wiser than you and me, brother, and maybe they did the right thing. But next time, it'll be no more Mr. Nice Guy. I'm absolutely sure about that. Let's go to Lebanon, where Jad is on the line. Jad, welcome.
Good evening, George. The last time I spoke to you, the wound was still heavy. But now I want to thank you for always standing with the oppressed and the resistance. I've personally learned a lot from you. I want to talk about the Zionist regime's recent failed attempts to invade southern Lebanon. Despite their aggressive raids, Hezbollah's defense has not only protected Lebanese soil, but demonstrated the strength of the resistance. What happened today is only a fraction of the force, George, and what is coming will be even way more painful for this enemy. It's to their bad luck that they're mainly fighting us, the Shia of Imam Ali alayhi salam. It is the school of the Ahlul Bayt that we follow proudly that keeps us going. And in the spirit of that resilience, I must honor our martyr, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. His martyrdom has not weakened us. In fact, as you said last time when I called, it has only strengthened the cause. For the resistance is not just a military force, it's an idea. And as the martyr, Hajj Imad Maghni once said, the resistance is an idea and the idea never dies. This is why no matter what weapons or tactics our enemies use, they will never succeed in defeating the will of the people or this movement even. Politically, particularly, Hezbollah represents a crucial node in the axis of resistance, stretching obviously from Iran to Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. And just yesterday, as you were just saying, Iran has launched a significant missile attack against Israeli military positions. And this has underscored its commitment to this axis and to the broader fight against Zionist and Western dominance in the region. This act of solidarity, George, it reinforces the interconnectedness of the resistance front, and it sends a clear message that any aggression against one part of the axis, it will provoke a unified response from all. Anyways.
Yeah, very powerfully put, Jad, in Lebanon. Hoz is in London on the same subject, I suspect. Hoz, what do you want to say? We've lost him momentarily. Let me tell you something about the second hour. We've got Colonel Douglas Macgregor, a retired U.S. Army colonel, an author, and a foreign policy and defense policy consultant of the highest order. In any sane polity, he would be in the White House in an important position in the next government's administration. I hope very much that that's what happens. But he's coming up right after the break, and the break is right after we talk with Hoz in London. Go ahead, Hoz.
Hi, George. I just wanted to, you're the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. You're our, you're basically the heart of our party. And I just wanted to say that all the other parties have come out near enough and said Israel has the right to defend itself. Israel, shouldn't be attacked and this, that, and the other. What I'd like is, what's our position as the Workers' Party about the fact that Israel has murdered men, women, and children, has destroyed every single mosque, school, university, hospital it can in Gaza, and if it was allowed to do the same in the West Bank, it would do. So I just want to know from you.
An occupying power, thank you for your kind words, an occupying power has no right of self-defense against the people whose territory it's occupying. This is a simple matter of international law. Let me take it to France. The idea that Germany had a right to defend itself against the French resistance and deem terrorist the men and women of the French resistance deem acts of sabotage by the French resistance as terrorist acts, deem the killing of Nazi occupation forces as acts of terrorism. I just have to say that, and everyone watching and listening knows immediately how absurd that is. Countries only have the right to self-defense, to defend their own country. When they take over someone else's country, 75 years of occupation, more than 50 years in the case of Gaza and the West Bank, when they have murdered and maimed and tortured and exiled and disappeared uncountable thousands of civilians from the territory they have illegally occupied, the idea that they have a right to defend themselves against the people whose land they've stolen, against the relatives of those people they have murdered, is plainly, utterly ridiculous. And the fact that I even need to say that, and that it will sound so strange to the newspaper journalists and broadcasters that are listening or will hear it, and some will seek to have me prosecuted for saying it, is a measure of how far down the rabbit hole we have gone. David McTeague says Iran showed the state of Israel. It's not all talk. And Nadir Rahim says, Mr. Galloway, do you have any information regarding the damage done by Iran on the Israeli airbase? I don't, because a state of total censorship has been imposed on the results of last night's air raids. And that in itself tells you everything you need to know. An Israeli citizen will be sent to prison if they publish even a photograph of a burning building. That's the only democracy in the Middle East. Federico Mazandarani says the Sky News interviewer did everything in our power to derail the juggernaut that is Marandi. They failed miserable. Felt sorry for her ashen face. Very well said, Federico. I hope Professor Marandi hears that well-deserved praise. Let's take a break, and then it's Colonel Douglas Macgregor. You definitely don't want to miss that. Stay tuned.
Mr. President, we got a report of a 50-foot woman marauding through Washington, sir.
Thank you, Captain. But I'm looking for a shorter woman, one who likes to take long strolls in the park and yell at minorities.
She's not looking for a date. She's terrorizing the city.
Is there a difference? A little levity. Call in the military.
We are the military, sir.
Boy, we got here fast. We better do something, right?
Shall I scramble the jets, Mr. President?
No, thanks. I'll just take a muffin and some coffee.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Back in the days of kilts and claymores, Colonel Douglas Macgregor would have been a compatriot of mine. He's probably from the clan of Rob Roy Macgregor, who knew a thing or two about irregular guerrilla fighting. I can tell you, I have a portrait on my wall of the escape of Rob Roy at the ford when he escaped from vastly superior numbers of English redcoats. But that's another matter. Since then, Colonel Douglas Macgregor has become a retired U.S. Army colonel. He's an author. He's a consultant on both defense and foreign policy at a very high level. And we're very lucky that he's a regular guest on the mother of all talk shows. Colonel Macgregor, thank you for joining us on such a significant evening, the evening which might turn out to be the beginning of the end of all of us. If Netanyahu attacks Iran this evening, as seems overwhelmingly likely, then Iran will respond tenfold compared to last evening, if not 100-fold, certainly vastly a greater attack than they mounted last night. Then your country, 4 weeks before a presidential election, quite likely to be dragged in. And then the balloon really goes up, doesn't it?
Well, I think the trigger for the regional war that you're talking about was really the Israeli Defense Forces invasion of southern Lebanon. You could even argue that the destruction of so much of Beirut and the killing of 7,000 people in and around Beirut in northern Lebanon has had a profound impact. But clearly, when the Israelis made the decision to go into the south, that was really the start of the regional war, because the Iranians had always taken the position that Hezbollah could take the bombardment and that they would not engage unless the Israelis went in on the ground. That's now happened. And so the Iranians have responded to the earlier provocation. And I think that in retrospect, they will regard what they did as having been a mistake. Not that they attacked, but that they were so feeble in their response, because it's going to invite, as you rightly point out, a devastating response from Israel.
Well, unless, I mean, I was a boxer once, Colonel, unless it's a rope-a-dope tactic that Ali performed on George Foreman, unless in the wake of the Israeli response, they come out all guns blazing, all left hooks swinging. But I tend to your point of view, and I put it gently to Professor Marandi, that it was performative in that it targeted only places and things that had been targeted before. When the performance of the missiles was so spectacularly successful, they could have taken out a lot more things than they did, but they deliberately did not do so. Why do you think they made that calculation?
Well, there are two reasons for that, George. The first is that you have a new government in Tehran that is actually, by the standards of the past, very, very moderate. And the new president of Iran has made it very clear that he wants a new relationship with the United States, that he was hoping to develop a new rapport with the West. He obviously wants to get out from under financial sanctions, but most important, wants to get out of this straitjacket of hostility that we live in. And I say the United States and Iran. So I think that was one reason. He wasn't interested in provoking the Israelis any further. The second part of it is that I think both President Putin and President Xi have urged not only the government in Tehran, but all the governments in the region to exercise restraint. I think finally they decided they had to respond to the earlier provocation, but that's why it was so modest in scale. And as you point out, killed, I think, only one Israeli citizen, which of course is by design. That's not what they wanted to do. I think they wanted to demonstrate their capability for precision strike. The problem is that, as I pointed out earlier, from the Israeli standpoint, it was feeble. And the Israelis do not believe in symmetrical warfare. They're big believers in asymmetry, and they will strike back with a serious vengeance. And I expect that, as you point out, the Iranians will respond. Hezbollah is already doing very serious damage to the Israeli ground force moving into their country. The defense minister spoke publicly and tried to explain to the population the heavy losses were unavoidable because this was the cost of the most justified war in their history. And again, you got to go back to Netanyahu and remember, he said, I'm going to utterly annihilate Hamas and drive the population of Gaza out or kill it or both. I'm going to also eventually do the same to the West Bank. I'm going to defeat and eliminate Hezbollah. We're going to crush the Shiite militias in Iraq. We'll destroy the Houthis. And ultimately, we will destroy Iran, which is the ultimate evil incarnate that is plaguing us. And for this purpose, we have assigned ourselves the mission in the U.S. Armed Forces to stand ready to support Mr. Netanyahu in this rather rapidly widening regional conflict.
Well, that's what we used to call, when you and I were younger, the $64,000 question, when $64,000 was worth a lot more than it is now. Why?
Yes.
Why 4 weeks before a presidential election would the United States embroil itself in all-out war in the Persian Gulf, after which no oil, no gas, no ships will travel? You won't be able to pay $10 a gallon for petrol because you won't be able to get any. Nothing will move through the Red Sea, through the Straits of Hormuz. Why? That's the big question, isn't it?
Well, I think we can answer it. Two reasons. One is Mr. Netanyahu knows that right now he has more control and influence over what the United States government does than anybody in the government. We are unconditionally supportive of whatever he wants to do. Now, this is not a function of American public opinion. There has been no debate. There's nothing constitutional about our actions. This is simply the product of the strength and the power of the Israel lobby. And the Israel lobby at this stage controls both parties. So we have to assume that it doesn't make a great deal of difference who wins the election. If you're living in the Middle East, the Israelis are going to continue to enjoy the kind of support that they've got right now. And contrary to whatever President Biden and his administration says, they have fundamentally enabled the Israelis all the way along. There has been no serious opposition, no obstacles in the way of Israeli action. So the only thing that we can say at this point is that Hezbollah is putting up very stiff resistance, and the Israelis are going to take hard casualties trying to fight their way through that. We can also say what you've said, which is that Iran will respond dramatically to whatever the Israelis now do. Now, what will the Israelis do? Well, they're going to destroy, I suspect, the oil production facilities in Iran. They will also try to decapitate the government. And that is also something that they depend very heavily on from us, because we're the ones with the highly skilled and sophisticated ISR capabilities that allow us to find people like Nasrallah and others so that the Israelis can target and kill them. And then finally, I'm sure that the Israelis will go after the so-called nuclear development facilities, the places where the centrifuges exist, and our friends, the Iranians, have been trying to build a nuclear weapon. At least that's the allegation. So I think that will all happen. Now, the Iranians have already said, and I'm saying now the Iranian Revolutionary Guard has said that if you destroy Iran's oil facilities, its production facilities, that they're going to put the torch to just about everything else in the region connected to oil, which means that your prediction of serious economic consequences and financial Armageddon are entirely justified. You are spot on. That is going to happen. Then the question is, what does Russia do? Russia has invested very heavily to help the Iranians build up their air and missile defense capability. How effective will that be against the Israelis? We'll see. We have to assume it will have some effect. Will it be enough? We don't know yet. We'll have to wait and see. And I think the Chinese are absolutely apoplectic right now, because the last thing they want to see happen is the Straits of Hormuz close, because they're heavily dependent on all of that oil and gas that comes from there through the Strait of Malacca and then up through the South China Sea. So you're going to have Chinese and Russian interest in this. And ultimately, I think the entire Shanghai Cooperation Council, along with this thing that we call BRICS, all of it will side with Iran against us, and I mean Israel and the United States.
So riveting, indeed dazzling, was that summary. I'm loath to move you to another theatre of conflict, but I feel I must. the bowling over of the remaining resistance of the Zelensky crew in Ukraine seems to me, you know far more than I, seems to me to be really rapidly picking up pace. I have a feeling that as we once said about other conflicts, it'll all be over by Christmas. I have a feeling that the Russians are on a roll in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian armed forces aren't actually in much of a mood to continue resisting it. What's your take?
No, I think you're right. Of course, the whole idea of terminating this conflict is something that Washington refuses to participate in. That's the one thing that could change if you ended up with President Trump. I think he would move to put an end to the conflict in Ukraine. But otherwise, I think you're right. The Russians have fired so many Iskander missiles. These are medium-range ballistic missiles to destroy all of the Army tactical missile systems, HIMARS, rocket artillery systems that we've given to the Ukrainians, that those systems have largely vanished from the battlefield. The front lines are crumbling, and the last areas of resistance have been subjected to attack with 6,000 and 9,000 pound fuel air explosive bombs. So I think the decision in Moscow is very clear. They've had it. They're tired of this nonsense. They want to end it. They have been trying vainly to find a negotiating partner. That partner hasn't shown up. So I think they're going to move decisively to the river. I would not be surprised to see them enter Kiev, because they know that unless they take those kinds of actions, this will not end. They'll end up dealing with some sort of resurgent, insurgent enemy in Western Ukraine, which, of course, they don't want. No one in their right mind would want it. And I know the people that are living in Western Ukraine don't want it. But that's the sort of idea that lingers in Washington, D.C., and I think where you are in London.
I'm with you entirely in that analysis. So let me go on finally to something on which we may differ. It's only, 50 days less to the presidential election. Who's going to win? And where will it make any difference who wins?
Well, you know, I have many attributes, but I am not a prophet. So I'm reluctant to say one way or the other. I think much is going to depend on the quality of the election itself. You know, we have a huge problem with ballot fraud, with all the absentee ballots that come flowing in. We have a bad habit of taking the motor voter registration. These are the automobile registrants and driver's licenses, and treating them as all as evidence for citizenship, when in fact that's not the case. We have a problem with online voting. How do you secure that? People insist it's secure, but there are questions. And then we're going to have to see who actually shows up. Now, my personal suspicion is that there isn't much enthusiasm out there for Vice President Harris. If there is, I haven't seen it, and I live on the East Coast. And I have lots of friends who are Democrats, and they tell me privately, there's no enthusiasm out there for this woman, none. So if things are reasonably clean in terms of the voting, I think President Trump will return to the White House. Now, of course, that assumes that President Trump makes his way through the election to the White House and someone doesn't successfully kill the man, because I don't think we've seen the end of that either.
I agree. It's remarkable how little attention there is to the fact that the most likely next president and the immediate past president has had 2 attempts on his life. He appears to believe that these threats to his life come from Iran. He cannot possibly be stupid enough to believe that, Colonel. It's the American deep state that's trying to kill Donald Trump, don't you think?
Well, I certainly agree with your first point, which is the Iranians have had nothing to do with this. There's simply no tangible, concrete evidence for that at all. Now, is it the deep state? Is it, well-financed minorities, corporate interests? I mean, this is a barrel of eels. There are all sorts of characters in there with an agenda that could be part of this, but clearly it is not Iran. It may be that the so-called deep state that you're mentioning, the swamp, as some people call it, is trying to prepare the American people for war with Iran. And so it's convenient to say, again, all evil stems from Iran. But that's nonsense. And I don't think most Americans privately buy that argument in the least.
Colonel Macgregor, I salute you. Thank you very much for another dazzling display on the mother of all talk shows. I'll tell you, the quality of guests on this show is off the charts. Let me take a quick break, then it's another star, Steve Sosebee, founder of PCRF and Heal Palestine for Gaza's Children. He's been a regular guest of ours, and my goodness, does his organization have its hand full now. Stay tuned.
You have to remember back in 2002, 2003, there was a wish by George Bush for regime change. That's what was driving him. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, which of course didn't exist in Iraq. So they had to construct some sort of formula, some sort of cover story in order to persuade the British public that intervention in Iraq was right. Now, David Kelly, as an expert in weapons of mass destruction, knew that this was untrue. He knew that there were probably no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
That was a guy that could have brought down, the whole system.
I reckon you're chaff. You're being thrown up to divert our probing.
The Foreign Affairs Select Committee, that parliamentarian briefing, I think that was an indignity to him.
We saw it on the news, and my very first thought was shock. Oh my God, you know, this man is in the eye of the media hurricane. He should be protected by that at least.
You've got blood on your hands, Prime Minister. Are you going to resign over this?
I don't know the details of how Lord Hutton happened to be selected, but what was certainly the case is that he was the right kind of judge to use from the point of view of Downing Street and the intelligence services as well.
Of the 21 days of hearing, only one half of one day was spent on discussing the forensic aspects. That is disgusting.
We were given the Hutton report the day before. It was published. But actually what happened was he went too far.
The events of 2003 were disgraceful ones in this country's history, and it's unfinished business. Those responsible for an illegal war, those responsible for the death of David Kelly, have not been brought to justice. There's been no inquest into David Kelly's death. There needs to be one. We need to make sure that those who behaved in a reprehensible way in 2003 are finally brought to book.
Now, you get that film and my earlier film, The Killings of Tony Blair, free gratis if you support me on the Patreon channel, patreon.com/George Galloway. It is by far the most efficient way of supporting the mother of all talk shows. Our 2 episodes per week depend on the viewers. They depend on the audience. Now, I used to make financial appeals all the way through every show. We thought that was demeaning and annoying. So now I'm asking you, at the end of this show, support us through patreon.com/George Galloway. Now, the poll is almost 30,000 now, but still, effectively, 3/4 of you believe, as Colonel Macgregor and Professor Marandi and I all believe, that Israel will attack Iran. Though it has to be said, they haven't done so yet and have just made excuses as to why, if they do, it won't be tonight. Steve Sosebee is a very considerable hero of mine. The work that his organizations are doing for Gaza's children is absolutely extraordinary, heartbreaking, heartwarming, at exactly the same time. They've sustained or suffered a grievous loss in the last week when one of their key ladies working there was gratuitously murdered by the Israeli attack force. And we wanted to talk to Steve about the orphanage attack last night, the school attacks that are ongoing, the decapitations, the amputations, the calvary being suffered by the children of Palestine, particularly in the Gaza Strip. Steve, welcome back to the Mother of All Talk Shows. First of all, our condolences for the loss of your colleague. Perhaps you'd say something about her and about what happened before enlarging into the bigger picture, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, thank you, George, for having me on and for the great work you're doing, your voice for the oppressed and for the suffering and for justice. Islam Hijazi was a 30-year-old mother of 2 children in Gaza. She is symbolic of many hundreds of thousands of young mothers in Gaza who have struggled since last October and even before that during the siege, but particularly since last October, trying to survive in Gaza and protect their children, feed their children. Every day she woke up in a tent. She'd been displaced several times from the north and in the south, had been displaced several times as well through the bombing campaign of the IOF. And every morning woke up trying to seek food for her children, clean water, bathrooms, just the basic requirements for any human being. That was a daily struggle for her and for hundreds of thousands of mothers in Gaza and for the 2.4 million people there. Wondering every day whether the bombings that were going on surrounding her area were going to fall on her. She witnessed way too much death and destruction. She was separated from her husband, who was in the north since last November, had not had any ability for her children to see their husband. And so her struggle was a considerable one of just daily survival. At the same time, she was dedicated to helping her people. I remember her telling me that, she initially wanted to leave Gaza, but then when she had the opportunity to serve her people and to do something for them, she dedicated herself to staying and implementing programs there on the ground that were helping to save lives and intervene in the needs of the people there. Islam Hijazi was a leader for our organization on the ground. She was the one who was responsible for helping to build one of the only field hospitals operating in Gaza today. She was somebody who oversaw the feeding of thousands of people through our food kitchens every day, the transfer and evacuation of injured children. As much as it's challenging to get them out, the few that we were able to get out was thanks to her efforts and her dedication. I worked with her for 10 years. I hired her as an assistant secretary a long time ago when she was still at university, and she worked her way up through her dedication, her intelligence, her ethics to become a leader. And her killing, I spoke with her an hour before she was killed, was both shocking and extremely sad and tragic.
An unspeakable crime. Were her children also killed in the same attack?
No, she was visiting a friend at a hospital. Oh, sorry, George. Her 2 children, Maria and Mohammad, were with their grandmother in their tent back in Mawasi, Han Yunis. And she was actually going to visit a friend and take for them gifts who had just given birth at the Jordan Field Hospital. So she was alone at the time of her killing.
Oh, dear God.
However, let me add this, George.
Yeah.
Sorry. We've set up a fund for her children. We're dedicated to, they're orphans now, but we are going to take care of them and make sure that these children have whatever opportunities that life can offer them. We'll do our best to get that for them through education and all the basic necessities they need. We're not going to abandon them. They're beautiful. Her beautiful young children deserve some opportunities, and now that they've lost their mom and are separated from their father, the struggle that they're going to have in the future is beyond what we can imagine. But we're here as an organization dedicated to helping, and you can visit our website if you'd like to help support Islam's children. Sorry for interrupting.
Well, include me in that project, please, Steve. Anything I can do on that, I will. The wider picture: business as usual, carnage as usual, even an orphanage the scene of slaughter overnight, in pure rage at their inability to stop Iranian missiles. They took it out on orphans in the Gaza Strip. You begin to run out of words for what these people have done, don't you?
I think we've all run out of words a long time ago. This is by far not the first time this kind of bombings of innocent children has taken place. We remember back in October of last year, the bombing of Al Ahli Hospital, in which hundreds of people who were seeking refuge outside the hospital were decapitated, as you said earlier, were killed, burned, and suffered permanent disabilities and amputations as a result. This happens on a regular basis in Gaza. We've seen it to the extent that the world has become so desensitized that it hardly makes headline or has any mention in the news any longer. But the Gazans and the Palestinian people are taking note, and they're very aware of these crimes. And those of us who are here supporting the people on the ground there are very much aware of what's happening. And God willing, there will be accountability for these crimes one day.
I mean, so give us again your website details so that people at the end of this show can help you. Steve.
Yeah, it's healpalestine.org, www.healpalestine.org. There's a variety of ways you can help. Obviously, helping Islam's children is the most important thing we're trying to do right now to ensure that they have a future. But our organization, George, as you know, I've been on your show a few times, is the main organization bringing injured kids to the United States for free care. People make some comment about, well, it's ironic the Americans are bombing them and then treating them. The American government isn't treating them. We're working with our brothers and sisters in different communities to get them treated by hospitals who open their doors, have nothing to do with the U.S. government. They are welcomed by the Palestinian community and the activist community of people who are here to show their solidarity and support and love for these children to help them heal. The type of injuries we're seeing that these kids are enduring is beyond description. The multiple amputations, the missing pieces of skull, the burns beyond recognition that they're enduring. Our organization is coming in and trying to help and heal them. This is not a government-led initiative. It's an initiative led by people who stand in solidarity with the people of Gaza and with the people of Palestine and with all oppressed people all over the world who are struggling for freedom, and those poor innocent people who are being subjected to these kind of crimes, being committed mainly by my government.
May God preserve you. Thank you, Steve Sosebee, as always, founder of PCRF and Heal Palestine. He works for Gaza's children as others work to kill and mutilate them. Now, if you haven't seen my latest edition of Have It Out with Galloway, which looked at after Nasrallah, what next, then you really have missed out. You can get it on YouTube. I commend it to you. But if you want to appear on Have It Out with Galloway on the video wall, as more and more people are beginning to do, here's how you do it. If you want to join me on Have It Out with Galloway, you can be the audience member on that video wall so that I can see as well as hear you. Come and have it out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
So, have you got that? Haveitoutwithgalloway.com. If you think you're hard enough, come along. Whether you're against me or for me, you're welcome on that show, as indeed you are on the mother of all talk shows. Abdullah is in Leeds on Iran. Let's hear from him. Abdullah in Leeds, welcome.
Hello, George. Good afternoon, good evening in there. It's Abdullah from Leeds. And I would like to say something about Middle East and Iran. And I don't think I can say anything more than your excellent guest, Steve, and Professor Mohammad Marandi said. And I just want to tell you that you've got a great show, an excellent show. I'm always a follower of you.
Thank you, brother. How beautiful. What a lovely call Abdullah in Leeds. I'm really touched by that. Let's take the next call then. Roland in Bristol on Lebanon. It is the global university of the airwaves, after all. Roland, what would you like to say?
Hi, George. It's nice to be speaking to you. George, I've got a theory on the wider region with regards to the conflict in Israel. What that is that we know that the US is bankrupt to the tune of $36 trillion, and they accumulate $1 trillion of debt every 90 days. So that's the US being bankrupt and the West. Then if you take into account the Ukraine-Russia war and the sanctions on Russia, I think that has exacerbated the BRICS membership. So as a result, you now have about 35 countries that are part of BRICS. Take into account Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has dropped the petrodollar. So that means now that the US really has nothing propping up the economy. Israel has expressed its desire to expand, and they even Netanyahu even showed a map recently, I think it was last week, of the states he wants to take over.
At the UN, he did it at the UN, right?
That's right, yeah. And I think the big picture, I think that no one's really talking about, is there's a 4,500 mile road and rail link running from St. Petersburg right down either side of the Caspian Sea through Iran all the way down to India. And that is actually going to draw that entire section, that entire continent together. So the next world economic hub is that area. And I reckon that they're trying to get Israel to interrupt that corridor so that the West can keep its foot in the game. And if you look at all of those things together...
Well, of course, their fiendish desires are unending, Roland, but having these fiendish desires and being able to actually execute them are two different things. All I can tell you is that Netanyahu tried to phone President Putin in the last 24 hours, in fact, repeatedly in the last 36 hours, and President Putin refused to pick up the phone. So the formerly close relationship between Russia and Israel is not in a good place and slated to get much, much worse. Gayatri and I, God willing, will be attending the BRICS Congress in Kazan in Russia, whether the British government likes it or not, and we hope to bring you plenty of reportage from there, as well as top-line interviews with some of the most important people at that conference. It's later this month. It's in Kazan, which is a glorious Russian city and the capital of Tatarstan. It is one of the most eagerly anticipated visits that Gayatri and I have ever made. Mr. Aslam Malik says Muslim countries should unite as one ummah. That means nation, people. Forget the divisions between Sunni and Shia. Sushi is what I prefer. Sunni, Shia, let them work together. Let them be sushi. I had a great meeting in Crawley just the other night, which is available online. It was an outstanding leader. And I met a couple who were the sushi couple. Shia, wife, Sunni, husband, as one behind the right cause. Sharky says they destabilize Middle Eastern countries, and then comes the influx of migrants, and they wonder why. It's such a good point, Sharky. I mean, I almost don't want to highlight it because it seems like I'm being hostile to migrants. But if there's one or even 2 million refugees on the road from Lebanon and Syria, where do you think they're headed, you idiots, cheering on a war, and then all the human cost of it washes up at your door and makes you even more mad. Paul Meany says, remember Netanyahu saying, Israel will bankrupt the USA and blow it into the wind. I don't actually remember him saying that, but it wouldn't surprise me if he did. Shariz is in Los Angeles, and she loves MOATS, or he loves MOATS. He wants to talk about World War III. Let's find out why. Shariz, welcome.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, George. It's lovely, lovely talking to you. And I've been following your show for the last whatever years. And anyway, I'm not going to go into that too long. I'd like to talk about American politics. I was a Democrat right along. And unfortunately, the turn has taken place where Kamala, as you know, is pro-Israel, 100%. Jill Stein, yes, but she has no chance, but she will find out anybody. America is a fantastic country, beautiful place. American people are fantastic. These 500 politicians who are in the Senate and Congress, these are the venom, snakes, venom. They are the ones who are ripping the hearts out of all the American people. So I just like to tell the listeners, do not be angry with America itself, but these politicians are the ones who are doing it, just like what Keir Starmer is doing it. If 70-80% of England doesn't agree to him, but he comes out and says, entire England is with you. Anyway, sir, the other thing is with Israel, Netanyahu, Ariel Sharon seems like an unpoisonous snake to Netanyahu. Netanyahu is brutal. He's very, very brutal. And I think when you take on the whole, the economy of Israel is gone. It's finished. The people in Israel are leaving. Unfortunately, what has happened, or fortunately, is when Hezbollah, when Hamas, or the Iranians, they are only targeting the IDF forces place. And every time somebody talks about Hezbollah, they always say the terrorist Hezbollah, the terrorist Hamas, the terrorists. Why isn't our people going and saying illegal, rogue state of Israel, illegally occupied people?
Yeah.
Even at the United Nations.
You really couldn't get a more, thanks, Shariz. That's such a good call. And I'm really glad that you made it. I agree with everything that you said. There is no state in the whole history of the post-Second World War period that could possibly be described more aptly as a terror state, a rogue state, than the state of Israel. I mean, it has broken more international laws. It has invaded more of its neighboring countries. It has slaughtered more of the people it occupies. It has illegally annexed a city as significant as Jerusalem. They have illegally annexed it. Not recognized by anybody in the world, but that's what they have done. And the United States under Donald Trump moved their embassy there. So, Jill Stein may not have a chance of becoming the president, but she's sure going to affect the outcome. For me, the number one priority is to punish the Biden-Harris administration. So my advice to my friends in the United States, and I have many, vote anybody but Kamala Harris. Well, look, Gayatri is not with me at the table, but she's definitely with me in spirit and on the end of a line, I hope. And she's going to give us the roundup. My goodness, you look like what a wonderful set you've got there. I'm not going to ask you to tell us where you are, but tell us what's rattling on social media, please.
Well, first of all,
I and many of the people in the audience are all sorry for your poor health tonight. They're all wishing you luck, Godspeed. But Matthew White says, George, you were born for times like this, so we hang on your words. Thank you, and have a great show. I'll go on to the.
Yeah, I would have taken the day off. Let me just say, if I may, I would have taken the day off on any night but this one, because I'm that poorly with just a cold. But you know, when a man gets a cold, it's a very, very serious matter. The second preference would have been for you to take over as the main host of the mother of all talk shows, and let me do the social media roundup. And you know what? I think our audience is ready for that. And you've been training with me for 13 years now. It's about time you made your big debut as the host of the show. Anyway, that's a digression. What else is going on?
This is a digression. I'm going to read you an email from Hussein in Lebanon. He says, the way that Israel assassinates leader is cowardly. But as time passes, that doesn't affect the results on the ground. Also, if Iran assassinates Benzion Milikowski, that is the real name of Netanyahu, that will automatically make him a hero for the Western world, i.e. nobody remembers Sharon for his achievements rather than his defeats against the resistance upon the new millennium. That is Hussein in Lebanon. And Walter Cairns is asking, what? Shall I read Walter Cairns' email asking for your views?
Yes, please. I know Walter, actually. I've known Walter for about 50 years. So let me hear what he's saying.
Okay, so what are your views on the so-called Samson option? Under the full weight of its nuclear arsenal would be brought to bear should Israel's very existence be in peril. Is that what is causing the reluctance on the part of the US and UK government to support an attack on Iran by Israel?
Well, it may be. That is the Frankenstein point that I made on Sunday on the show. Once Dr. Frankenstein had made a monster, he no longer controlled that monster. The monster controlled him. And that is precisely what we've done with the monster called Israel. But the people of the world have got to decide. Are we going to have World War III because Israel will otherwise bring down the temple with its nuclear weapons on top of itself and that region? Well, I don't mean to be selfish, but the latter is better for the rest of the world than the former. The latter will destroy the Middle East, but the former will destroy the entire world. So we should never have allowed Israel to become this powerful monster. And we're going to have to accept that the people of the Middle East will never accept Israel. Never. Even in the countries under the Abraham Accords, negotiated, if that's the word, with Kushner, they are never going to accept Israel. It is a foreign implant. It is a colonial implant in the Arab world. And no one in the Arab world, other than a few leaders and businessmen who make money out of it, is ever going to accept them. So I hope that the best Israeli people will decide that the game is up and that Paris, New York, London, Lisbon are all better places to live than Netanyahu's Israel. That's what I'm personally hoping for. Give me some more. I've got time for one or two more.
Yeah, I'm going to give you two. This one is from Nati Johannes in Germany. And he or she says, I believe Iran is playing an absolute blinder. It has taken its time to respond, showing itself to be reasonable. Two, it drew Israel into Lebanon, as Hezbollah wanted, by stating it would not be sending troops. And 3, it hit Israel with a devastating but measured response, being careful not to kill civilians, and then withdrawing and waiting, again showing itself as reasonable. The Israelis are playing at shock and awe. The Iranians are playing at chess, and it is the Iranians' moderate approach that will win the public opinion. How so?
Well, okay, I get that. I'm always being invited to marvel at other people's 5G chess. Maybe it's because I don't play chess that I never quite am convinced by it. But thanks very much. I wish I could take you for chips tonight, but it's probably better for you given my state of health if I don't. Thanks very much indeed. Let me go to Bobby in London. Go ahead, Bobby.
Hi, Mr. Galloway. First of all, I hope you will feel better very soon. Drink lemon tea and honey, and you will feel better the next day.
Thank you very much.
The other things I wanted to say, Mr. Galloway, is about the Jewish state. The Jewish state never existed. I call them myself Zionist terrorists, and they will never remain there unless they leave. It is like when the French went to Algeria, and the Algerian, they said, you will never remain in Algeria. And what happened? Where is the French? Even the French president wanted to go to Algeria, and the current president, they said to him, no way. Israel must pay the price, and they must apologize about the crime they did to the Palestinians. This land belonged to the Arab Palestinians, and that's that. And when I look at you, Mr. Galloway, you remind me for my great man, and he is your friend, Tony Benn. You remember Tony Benn?
Mm-hmm.
A wonderful Tony Benn. Yeah. Thank you so much.
He was my father, politically speaking. So much so that I still use. Now, a decade after his demise, I still use many of his methods and many of his turns of phrase. And he is in my mind and my heart forever. Bobby in London, thank you for that very kind comparison. I suspect the last call will be Mohammad in the Netherlands on Israel. How's that for a global university of the airwaves? Mohammad, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hello, Galloway. I like your show. You have a great show.
Thank you.
And I like to watch it. And I want to ask you, what do you think about the common who's gonna win the elections in the States, if it matters for the Palestinian case? And the next thing I want to ask, what do you think if the Arab countries or the U.S. will attack Iran from Kuwait, or where they have military bases like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, or Bahrain?
I think I think the U.S. will not invade Iran, but if the U.S. participates in any way in the attack that Netanyahu will make on Iran, then all of America's friends in the region will pay a very high price if the airspace of Qatar is used, if the water of Kuwait is used, if Saudi Arabia is able to, by secret terms, facilitate an Israeli invasion or attack on Iran, rather, then all of these countries will be taken out. I think what you saw last night was a mere fraction, 180 missiles, a mere fraction of Iran's now obviously very formidable ballistic missile and hypersonic missile capability Imagine that raining down on Dubai. Imagine that raining down on the oil and gas facilities in Qatar. Imagine it raining down on the real estate that the United States has, that Western countries have in places like Bahrain and so on. So everyone has a big reason to hope that this does not become all-out war with America intervening, because it won't just be the devastation. Dubai will no longer exist. I hope you don't have property in Dubai, because it ain't worth the paper that you bought it off, because it will be turned into a smoking ruin just like that in a second or two. It will be incinerated. And ditto any of these Arab countries in the Persian Gulf that in any way assist a Netanyahu assault on Iran. But if America does not get involved, and it's a straight fight between Iran and Israel, the cost will be very high, but it is possible that we could contain it, short of a nuclear exchange. But if America joins the war, not only will all of its assets in the region be burned, we won't be burning anything ourselves. We certainly won't be burning oil or gas, because nothing will move through the Straits of Hormuz. Nothing will move through the Red Sea. Nothing will move through the Suez Canal. Just think about that. Mohammad in the Netherlands, I thank you. HAC says, what a stellar show tonight. Marandi's heartwarming salute to Gigi in his opening contribution was touching. Indeed, it touched me. Without you, George, we would be in the dark. Thank you for all your hard work. It's my duty. Heck, I am delighted still to be able to do it. I assure you, I think, that this cold I've got will pass, and that by the time Sunday comes, I'll be back firing on all, or at least most, cylinders. I do have time for one more call. It is Imran in Bristol on Iran and Israel. On you go, Imran. What's on your mind?
Hi there, George. So basically, the way I see it, I mean, obviously, Hamas and Hezbollah, Israel is not going to be something which is going to be an easy candy for Israel. As it comes to Iran, that's a whole different story otherwise. And as it comes to like Hamas and Hezbollah, I think like they're pretty much the same as ZZW and ZOB, the two uprising militia groups in the time of Warsaw Uprising. I mean, they were kind of terrorists in the eyes of Germans, but if you see who were supporting them in the eyes of those, they were still heroes. And with Israel, I mean, my theory is, I mean, they never wanted to stop the war anyway, and they will drag America. And America, to my theory, wants this war. Had they not wanted it, it would have been over by now by cutting the funds to Israel of these like billions of dollars of taxpayers' dollars, basically, you know, and also cutting that the penury which they keep providing Israel with all the time. So I mean, all of that is just a stage show which happens every day in the American press, and it will eventually lead to I think a bigger war which can engulf Middle East. I don't know what's the fate of Iran will be in that conflict, but Iran is not an easy force to subdue.
No, it is not. Look, Iran, thanks, Imran. Iran is a country of 91 million people. It is the youngest country on the earth. It has a formidable ballistic and hypersonic missile capability. It has a powerful armed force. It has a religious, philosophical weight in the region, with many friends in neighboring countries and indeed throughout the world. There are people who regard Iran as their spiritual leader. So destroying Iran will not be possible, short of a thermonuclear World War III that destroys humanity on the earth in toto. So let's hope that doesn't happen. Short of that, Iran will emerge as the victor of any war which is limited to Iran versus Israel. If the United States gets involved and it goes to war against Iran, then Iran's friends, its superpower friends, Russia and China, will have to decide what they are going to do about that. That's why I started the broadcast tonight by saying we could scarcely be meeting on a more dangerous night than this one. Let's hope we survive until the morning. Let's hope we're still here come Sunday, when, God willing, I'll be back with the mother of all talk shows. It's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you, and if it was, come back on Sunday at the same time, in the same place, and do bring another viewer with you. We're at 4 million now per week. Let's aim for 5. God willing, see you Sunday.